Welcome to Socialcast, your go-to place to learn about marketing, the latest social media news, and insights. Brought to you by Social Bakers.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to a live broadcast from Social Bakers. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn and on Facebook. We're joining you live, well, not from the Social Bakers offices. We're joining you live from home this time. We are, of course, all working remotely now. And I'm joined today by Christina. So Christina, it's really good to have you join our live broadcast. So today we're talking about the AllRemote team management reality. What is it actually like? And the reason why we're speaking to Christina is because Christina has been doing this for a long time. Your entire team is managed remotely, right, Christina? Maybe you can tell us a bit more about your team.
Hi, everyone, and hello from my living room. AllRemote here, and just apologize. Anything can happen. I have dogs and cats walking around, so really happy to live stream from our living rooms. Mantas, I love your setup as well. And yeah, let's talk about remote. My team is, as you mentioned, is entirely remote. These are a team of field marketers that are in different countries, different regions, different time zones, different continents, and I've been from hiring to actually the entire management process, creation and everything. Everything is remote for me, has been for a while, and yeah, I'm happy to kind of go through some processes that help me to manage my day-to-day work and the communication between my teams.
Yeah, and by the way, the thing that I'm noticing with many kind of calls now, you realize how many of your colleagues have, pets, how many of them have children, and they're all in the screens as well. So the reality is definitely very different. But thanks for sharing that, and thanks for bringing your expertise and your know-how on how to do it well, because I can personally speak that for myself, that it hasn't been easy to move to all remote so quickly. And we feel like we kind of have it down and it should be easy, but they're just things that we haven't thought about, and they get in the way, of course, right?
Yeah.
But if I can maybe dive into the conversation. So, and I would like to get some personal tips from you, because I'm struggling. So how do you find the right balance between kind of one-on-one time between people, the team time, and time for your own tasks? What's your schedule like?
My schedule, as I mentioned, I have teams from Singapore to New York, so the time difference is quite various, and it actually is in different time zones. So for me personally, there isn't. I would say there is no such thing, start and end. We do have like one-to-one, and it's important really in this situations for those who are going to shift from face-to-face work environment to remote work environment. It is actually very important to not decrease, not completely cancel the one-to-ones, because they don't need to happen. I think vice versa. If you're just starting to shift, I think increasing the amount of one-to-ones, depending, of course, on your capacity, how many people you have in the team, etc. But I would recommend increasing. In this situation, is super important. Is to actually, I think over communicating is better than not communicating or under communicating. So for me personally, I do 2 one-to-ones a week. We do one team meeting. Well, not the entire team, but for those who are on the same time zone. So we do one team meeting, but I also do a lot of ad hoc calls on WhatsApps, depending even WhatsApp or any other like Slack or whatever is available, and also depending on the cultural differences from region to region, the communication style type is different. So you have to kind of try to find the right balance and what works. But I have to say that you can't just rely on this is one-to-one, and if there is anything, wait until your next one-to-one with the person. So ad hoc communication has to be part of your routine. So I talk to each person in my team remotely every single day. For example, there are some days when we just say, hey, nothing to kind of to discuss, we can cancel, but the communication, it's very important to keep some sort of communication, to kind of at least tell them, I'm here. If we don't need to discuss, you don't want to discuss, we don't have anything to discuss, I'm here if you need anything. So it's really trying to find the right balance between how many people you're managing, of course, the time zones and everything. But the most important thing is to actually keep the communication open. Don't just delay on things. Try to be as fast on the communication side as possible, especially times like this, because we in our situation, we know, like, we make decisions during our day, which is a night in Singapore. So if I don't communicate before I sleep, very important things might get lost. So that's why it is super important to keep this ad hoc communication up and open, and it can be any channel that you choose works between the two of you.
Yeah.
The
So
entire team in general.
if I heard you correctly, you said you do one-on-one a week and then one team meeting, or two
I do two one-to-ones and one team meetings. Yeah, per person.
Got it.
But sometimes it doesn't necessarily happen every week. We do have that. It happens 80% of the time. But the second one is kind of like, sometimes, not usual, but sometimes we cancel. Because if there is no need to just talk, like we can save each other 30 minutes. It's not just a self-serving thing. It actually is. This time is to discuss what's going on, update, next steps, maybe actually just connect teams to each other.
And just a reminder to the for the audience. So feel free to ask questions, and then we'll try to answer anything that concerns you about remote work. About how do you set it up? What tools do you use? How do you speak to your team? How do you encourage your team? How do you motivate your team? And how do you set up the process? Of course, that's the really critical part. And maybe that's something we should talk about. What is actually the most difficult part of it? Is it the team motivation? Is it the process? Is there something else that's really the challenge here?
I actually, maybe I'll shift the question a little bit. I won't speak about difficulties. I would probably speak about what's the importance, what's the most important part. I think equally motivation, of course, is as equally important as the process is. So that is a given. And I don't think we should just spend too much time to just say that we should motivate the people. We should take care of the people. We should be championing for our people. We should be there for them. We should bring value and output to their day-to-day life and to their personal development. So this is a given, but which is equally important as actually it is the processes. I do want to focus a little more on the processes today. So, for example, in my side, again, I think what helps, what would help, if we have an idea, at least in our head, I do have it visualized, but at least in our head as a manager, we should have an idea about how their time is actually conducted remotely. We should know, for example, how much time, let's say visualize for ourselves and for them as well, visualize their work into a few very tangible categories. For example, this is a field marketing team. In our case, that would be demand generation, lead generation, I don't know, events, etc. So these are like 3 or 4, 5 tangible areas that they should be focusing on. And also we should kind of understand for ourselves how much time they should be allocating for each given category. Let's say 30% of the given month, 30% of their time goes on more lead generation, or like 20% goes on the other activities. So kind of create a visual document or process for yourself as well to understand what they should be doing more and what they should be doing less. This is actually even important when you also see when one category, one area needs a shift. In our case, for example, events needed a shift. So we kind of like shifted from 40% events, 50% events to 10, 15% of virtual events or whatever. So this actually helps you understand what they should be doing more or less, and how to shift, what to increase, what to decrease, etc. So that's kind of like one basic rule that as a team setup, I would recommend.
May I ask a question about, you mentioned, that you got to kind of divide the time up into tasks and track it. And do you actually, and this actually leads to a question that someone on LinkedIn asked, and do you actually use tools to track the time, or is it just kind of left to the people? And then we have a question coming from LinkedIn. So what do you tools actually use? What are the tools that are really important to facilitate working from home? What are you using?
Pretty simple. We have plenty of tools, but working from home can be actually organized with very limited 3-4 tools. Zoom, WhatsApp, if your Zoom isn't working, FaceTime, well, emails, of course, and really very generic shared Excel document even could work if you are lacking more sophisticated tools. Like we do have plenty of them. We do have project management tools, etc. But I'm just saying that if you're lacking
basics,
it can be really organized in a very simple way as well. The more the better, of course. No, we don't track time. This is just for ourselves, between my team and myself, just to understand, like for me as well, so I can understand what are they spending their, like they should spend their time on, or so we can't just do like all sorts of project management tools and everything. We do have them, but I'm just saying that in case of really emergency necessity, like if you're lacking all these project management tools, you can do it in a shared document.
There's actually our team recently just published a blog on what kind of tools you need as well, and we can drop it in the comments. And it includes a section, of course, if you are joining from a social media team. Social Bakers has been pretty essential to our social media team to completely move all remote, and there's a section on how you can leverage our platform to do it. Do you have can you answer a few more questions from the audience, Christina?
Of course.
So people from Facebook, and thanks everyone for joining us on Facebook. And I'm gonna butcher this name, Sun Shengia. Thanks for joining. The question is, how do you make sure the team is productive and motivated while working from home? How do you do it?
Well, our team, I was in general talking about working remotely. They do go into offices, but right now all of us are at home. Each of us kind of like, I motivate my team with trying to keep business as usual, because in reality, if we can work, we can do the same things. Unfortunately, not many people can, and I'm just talking about from my perspective, from my experience. So for us, and we are the lucky ones, I'm actually repeating again, for us, not much has changed. We just switched from working in the office most of us into working at home. And it's hard. I can see a lot of funny and interesting commentary and already some reports about how families actually juggle between their kids, their children, the time, how they share the one and only monitor they have. It's a difficult time. I think there is no generic solution to this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Me, like for me, I was the one of the luckiest ones. Not much has changed. My team's manager is still remote. They still work remotely. I still manage a remote team. So I'm motivating the same way I was motivating before, just being there and trying to support and trying to actually come up with solutions if we need a shift. And it doesn't matter what time it is here. If something is urgent, it's urgent. It can be early in the morning. It can be late at night. So that's how I try to kind of motivate my team.
Yeah.
Motivating myself is a little harder, but I'm not going to talk about that.
And I suppose setting some sort of or I suppose you were in trouble if you didn't have this before, but having a common goal, a clear common goal and clear targets makes it much easier.
Exactly. Yeah. So I want to mention that it is very important to have clear outputs as well. So for each task or each category, each work scope, what is the output? It can be a call log between teams and status tracker. It can be an actual visual document. It can be a collaboration document that they are working on. It can be already ready product or service that is already up and running. So really, like when you create tangible output ideas for the team and you make it clear, for this scope, this chunk of work, we would need to, this is the final result that we expect. It actually makes the work harder. So we more easier, not harder. So kind of like make it as easy for the teams as possible. So
yeah. Okay. May I ask you another question? So if we can maybe focus on some of the errors that marketers make when managing remotely. What do you think? What should you really be careful not to do?
Micromanaging. One thing that always comes to my mind when people actually feel uncomfortable managing working remote teams, and your first instinct as a person, as a human being, is I need to check every day, every second. But that's not how it is, because if you have a team that are in different time zones, etc., it just is not going to work. It's not the right approach. So try not to micromanage, try to stay calm, try to understand, create a process where you can follow without going mad, like without going, having to check every single second what's going on and where they are at, etc. So really divide the work into smaller chunks, and it's easier to track it. The progress is easier to actually register, and anytime you register any type of progress, it actually is a motivation. So even if it's a huge project, you have to divide it into manageable smaller chunks and do a status check, not like randomly, not like when you're stressed out, but make it part of your weekly routines. So that's one thing that I can think off the top of my head, because I have kind of seen this being an issue.
And if you look at your kind of history of working remotely, so if you look back, what is the one thing that you learned throughout that time that you just wish you would have learned way earlier?
That actually the most important thing is to do the setup first and then try to a setup that makes sense for you as a team, and that also feeds into the whole company environment. It's not just about the team that we were talking about. Like whatever way you're working with your team, that has to somehow tie back into your company environment and the company that you work for. So that's why I think I know, like this last week, it just came super out of the blue, kind of, and we were caught off guard, and we didn't manage to think of processes. But I think from the very, very beginning, that is the most important thing to sort out. So you don't create like it can create frustration among the team if it's not clear what is expected, when is expected, and how they should communicate back their progress. Because we have to kind of also understand that everybody is also trying to communicate their value, communicate that staying at home doesn't mean that they aren't working. At the opposite, some people work much later hours, etc., etc. So really, like, think about creating an environment where also your teams are able to communicate what they need and how they can communicate if they have a challenge, how they can communicate their progress, and what does that progress mean, smaller, shorter term, and a longer term.
Yeah. And so a personal question for me. So what are some of your tips for clear communication online? Because personally, total communication overload, really tricky. When everything moves online, you realize how much you were relying on just going to someone and asking them personally.
Challenge. Yes. So that actually, before I kind of jump into answering that question, I just want to kind of create an analogy. So in our case, I am the liaison between the field marketers, let's say, and the team in the headquarters. So I am the one just communicating to people, and most of the time in person. So that also has been a challenge for me as well. However, I think it's trying to apply the same method. So let's say for yourself, you have to divide things that can and should be communicated on one-to-one longer basis. And then talk about these things on your one-to-ones only. I know it's hard. When you're face to face, you can discuss it, but these days I think it just clarifying what needs to be communicated ad hoc and urgently, and then just communicate that only these days, because it is overwhelming and it's stressful for everyone when there is constantly communication as well. So so divide into two types, maybe three types of even communication. One is like overall weekly review, or however you call it. Another one, you can just call it like weekly task updates, and just talk about things that can be discussed on weekly basis. They don't need to discuss, and really eliminate your day-to-day ad hoc communication only to those things that are related for the things that are happening right now, just to kind of not overwhelm. So that's how I would recommend.
That is a very practical advice. I think obviously you have a lot of knowledge in this area, and I would again encourage the audience to ask questions right now and get them answered on the spot about remote working. Can I ask you about what maybe is your prediction for the future? So we're all working remotely now. We maybe before we were forced to it, we were a little bit reluctant on doing it for such long periods of time. Do you think this is really going to change the future of remote work forever?
I don't want to sound cynical, but I want to say I hope so. Because I think this is as much as all the negative that comes the economy, people are suffering, and it's super hard for families, for those who are affected, and those that don't know what's coming, what is happening, like the uncertainty is actually killing a lot of people are really anxious about what's happening and what's going to happen.
Yeah.
However, I think this also gave us an opportunity, if I can say that, use that word without being stoned here, but this gave us an opportunity to rethink about how we work, how we actually take care of the environment. Do we need to travel, like all the business travel? Do they need to happen? In general, I think education system can be
Right.
revisited. The governments will probably stop printing that much on papers, hopefully, and then move into more electronic, more like modern landscape environment. So I do think this was a huge challenge, and it's unfortunate, but I'm positive that this is going to bring positive change towards the future, like longer term. I think this was a lesson, maybe even that we have to understand that digital transformation as it is has to change from being just a buzzword where people just talk about it, but
Right.
it has become an imperative. A lot of, and not only just for the businesses, not only for brands, digital transformation towards governance and more global access to education. I think this is the time to rethink, reassess the opportunities, and then I'm really positive for that in a longer run. Like it is gonna have positive impact, at least on this few aspects.
Yeah. And maybe this leads me to this, excuse me, the second question, which is, I feel like there's a lot of gaps that this is going to show in our process in terms of how we operate, and perhaps this is the time to cover those gaps and find a process that's a little bit better. But do you think there's really are there other things that businesses can learn during this time working remotely?
Um, I think so, definitely. Like to again operationally to understand how we can move towards more like modern, kind of more electronic, more remote work environment wherever we can. I'm assuming that this will affect costs and things like that.
Right.
But also, I think it changes the aspect of human relationships within the companies, and I think between the companies and the customers. I think a lot of companies, a lot of brands, these days we have seen great communication towards the customers, and more like a more goodwill in that environment. So I hope that this is a good learning, and this will not stop after the outbreak is over. I think this trend is pretty positive, and I hope it will just continue, keep going.
Yeah. I certainly I have to agree with you. Yeah, there's so many lessons to learn. There's one good question coming from our audience on Facebook from Jay. Thanks for joining and watching and listening to us. So the question is, would you recommend we dress like we dress for work or stay in PJs while working from home?
Whatever works. I don't think there is a dress up police yet, so I think we can just do whatever we want. I personally pick and choose. Sometimes I dress up for work. Sometimes I dress up for dog walking and stay in the same environment. It depends. It depends what kind of conversations you're having, what's the team dynamic. It depends with who you are meeting. So I think there is no generic also rule. Whatever works. So we shouldn't really like. I'm not judging if anybody is not dressed or is in PJs or whatever. So think you have to pick and choose based on the dynamics of that meeting that you're attending.
Right. Yeah. Call me crazy, but I even put on perfume every morning. I live alone. What am I doing?
Yeah.
One more question from the audience, from Facebook. Lasarusa, thanks for joining us, and sorry if I butchered your name just now. Looking positively into the future, will we still depend on current perceptions or data, or should we be looking out for changes in ideals and values for consumers? Okay, a little bit slightly different question, as opposed to
Um,
remote working, but good question. What is going to change in terms of how we look at consumers?
I would say I am always pro for the ideal for the consumer, for the customer. So I am gonna say yes, we should all think about customer first, clientele, and whoever our consumer first. And as mentioned, like there are a lot of positive trends right now. I hope companies will keep this trend outside of or after the outbreak.
Mhm.
However, data is still an important part. And if I was to be utopistic, I would say, consumer ideal for the consumer, for the customer, but based on some
Yeah,
reasonable data sets, not just data but also like human thinking also. Why not a little more an emotional kind of
yeah,
aspect into it.
yeah. Even if any consumer behaviors are to change, well, the way you're going to see them first is through data, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So yes,
Yeah.
we
Well,
are all walk out from this slightly a different human being than we were before, and
exactly.
let's just try to be a better different human being than we were before. So let's just reflect. This is a time for us to reflect on ourselves, and think about how us as one human can
Mm,
support like
yeah,
the global ideas.
that is a very positive message. Do you have actually energy to answer a few more questions?
I have a lot of energy, Mantas. Yes, let's go.
So we have a question on, I don't know if it's from LinkedIn, but we have Amelie asking. So, and a really good question. Hi, Christina. What do you think about work-life balance now that everyone's working from home? I assume for many people, it's difficult to separate now that your living room is the office and vice versa.
um, I think work-life balance has stopped being a thing for some time,
Hmm.
especially for those whose work is online. So for me, I don't know if I say unfortunately or I say fortunately, but I am really like I have peace with that idea that for me there is no such thing like our vast majority of our awake time is work.
Yeah.
um so and then there is a little chunk that is life, and throughout that time that is life, we still manage to sneak in an email, a Slack message, or something. So I think it's been some time, for at least for some industries, that the lines have been blurred, and this is, I think, the a new reality. And I again, I don't know if unfortunately or fortunately, but I think we are going to normalize this at some point.
Mhm.
This is going to be the normal. I hope I didn't upset Amelie. Thanks for the question,
No,
though.
and we were talking to some colleagues, and they said they discovered that they just work so much better at different hours of the day. And yeah, maybe we do need to be flexible to people's habits, and this shows. Christina, anything else to add to this conversation at the current moment?
uh let's just be kind and sensible, and think about especially like managing teams, think about more open, transparent communication. Think about how this extra urgency that we put in them on them at that given moment, what's the benefit? Is there actually a real benefit? So really try and be the best version of humankind possible. These are very difficult times for everybody. All of us have a lot of difficult situations on the back of our minds, and we are trying to actually or work trying to kind of to make business as usual decisions and processes. So let's just be kind and supportive, and yeah, that's it. Just show our customers that we are there for them, but being there for our own people as well. So that's all.
Christina, I promise you that I will personally try really hard to be the best human possible.
Thank you, Mantas. Me too.
Well, for the audience, I want to share that if you want to really dig deep into the process of remote work sort of for the social media team. So we have a webinar coming up Thursday for the Western part of the world, and a Friday morning, I think, or Friday afternoon for the Eastern part of the world. And the webinar is called the Zen Guide for Remote Social Media Teams. And so hopefully after watching this webinar, you will feel very relaxed about this whole all remote marketing thing. I know it can be stressful. Well, Christina, thank you so much for jumping on this call. I hope we get to speak to you soon again and see how it's going and how the habits are changing.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. And yeah, always happy to be your guest, Mantas. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining. Bye-bye.